John 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, so some of you guys underline verse 3, because that's true for some of us that are in quarantine right now. The wine's running out. And that's what happened actually at this wedding. Verse 3. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus, Mary, said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants who were there, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, when the people have drunk freely, and then the poor wine. But you've kept the good wine till now." This was the first of his signs that Jesus did in Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory. And his disciples, underline this, and his disciples believed in him. Circle the word believed. His disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and he stayed there for a few days. So I want you to understand something that's happening here in the life of Jesus. Jesus is just beginning his ministry. He hasn't done any miracles up till this point. So he's about 31, 32 years old at this point. So relatively a young man. For those of us that are old and crusty, like older than 35, we look at Jesus and go, Jesus is still a young man. If you're like in your teens, you're like, he's old. But Jesus is about 30, 31, 32 years old. He's just starting his ministry. In the Jewish thought, as you got older, you would get more and more responsibility as it dealt with becoming a man of God in the Jewish thought of the first century. When you became 13, you became a son of the commandment, and then as you got older, there would be certain marks in your life where you would, in your late teens, you would be given more responsibility. You have to go out and get a job. At about 20, they would assume that you were going to go get a wife and start a family. By the time you got to 30 as a man, if you had continued in your studies, your rabbinic studies, they would have considered you able to teach. So pre-30, Jewish culture would not have allowed you to preach or teach, because they would have thought up to that point, you're still learning, you're still becoming a man and starting a family, learning what that meant to be responsible. And so Jesus right now, at just past 30 years of age-ish, is now able to teach and preach in a synagogue. And now he's going to actually start his ministry right around this age range. And his first miracle is going to get done at a wedding. So if you got your notes, which you don't have them physically, but if you're on Facebook with me, right to the right of the screen, you will see a link that's pinned right there, and it says to click on that, and our notes will pop up, and you can follow along in the notes online with me. And number 1 is this. Ready? The wedding. First one is this, the wedding. How many of you guys have ever been invited to a wedding? Now, I can't see any of you, but raise your hand. Go ahead, raise them right in your house. Okay? If you're not raising your hand and you've been to a wedding, shame on you. You don't lie to your pastor ever, even online. Okay? So those of us that have been invited to a wedding. So if you're unfamiliar with Temecula, if you're watching somewhere else in the world, Temecula is like a haven for brides wanting to get married. They will literally fly in from all over the United States to get married in the Temecula Valley. Why? because we have a bunch of beautiful vineyards. We have a bunch of beautiful places to stay, a bunch of beautiful places to visit. We're like less than an hour from the beach, less than an hour from the mountains. We could play in the sand. Temecula is just like the jewel of the Inland Empire because of all that's available to people, especially when you want to plan a wedding. And so for those of us that live here, the vineyards are like 2 miles away from literally the church right now. And people that are getting married in our local area will do weddings all over our valley. Well, one of the staples of weddings throughout history is what's there going to be to drink. And if you were in a Jewish culture 2,000 years ago, I want you to understand something. So there's no refrigeration. There's no way to keep things from either fermenting or going bad as far as food goes. So what you would do is you would either eat things immediately, or if you wanted it to ferment or get older or dry out for some reason, you would pack it away because it's usually hot there in the summer, and in the winter it's mild. And so because there's no refrigeration, wine or grape juice that you would bring in from grapes would quickly become wine. It wouldn't take very long. And so they would use wine as kind of in the same way we use water. And so because the water in Israel, especially 2,000 years ago, was not totally pure enough for everybody to go to the well and bring out as much water as they wanted. So Jesus right here shows up to a wedding in a place called Cana. And so I want to show you where Cana is. This is a satellite, a Google map image of Cana. And I want you to look on this map with me. Right in the middle of your map is a circle called Nazareth. And Nazareth was where Jesus grew up. So Jesus is born in Bethlehem, which is in southern Israel. Nazareth is in northern Israel, which is where Galilee is. You see the Sea of Galilee to the right of the picture there? That's where Jesus walked on water. That's where the feeding of the 5,000 will be when we look at that miracle. But I want you to see straight north of Nazareth, and also the Mediterranean Sea's there on the left. That's what that big body of water is. And you see the circle I have right above Nazareth. Well, Cana is only about 9 to 10 miles away from Nazareth as the trail goes. And you see way over to the right on the shore of Galilee is the city of Capernaum, which is where the majority of Jesus' ministry will get done. His headquarters will be in Capernaum. But I want you to see these three areas because they're very close to one another. So Jesus grew up in Nazareth. His father, Joseph, brought the family back to Nazareth after he was born. And that's where he grew up. That's where he learned a trade. As far as he probably was a stonemason or a carpenter of wood. And so that's where he would have learned a trade there. And Jesus would have grown up in this whole Galilee area. Well, he shows up to the city of Cana, which is not far from his hometown of Nazareth. And now he is going to be at a wedding there, probably of relatives, because everybody that lived near him, he either knew or was relatives of. And himself and Mary and all the family got invited to this wedding. So the wedding, a first century Jewish wedding feast could often last up to a week, and it was an honor to be invited. You want to talk about a wedding? Wow. So in our culture, a wedding is expensive. You know, brides usually just go out of their way they buy an expensive dress. You know, for those of us that got married and had a little bit of money, it's like you spend money on your wedding. It's one of the most expensive events in really any culture. And it was no different for the Jews of 2,000 years ago. So in Jesus' day, they would have spent the most amount of money really on a wedding. Why? Because when you invited people to your wedding, it wasn't, here's 2 hours later, okay, everybody, time to go home. It was like 2 days later, we're not even halfway through, bro. So think about that. Everybody is packed in your house. It's relatives, it's your friends, your coworkers. Everybody got invited to this wedding. Well, guess what? It was like a camping out thing. They laid on your floor. They laid outside if it was nice. And people partied for almost a whole week in Jewish weddings. Well, here's the problem. If you don't actually know how many people are coming, maybe somebody brings a couple extra friends, like Jesus did here, he brought his disciples, and I don't know if they were kind of invited or if they were kind of invited because Jesus was invited, and so he said, hey, I'm going to bring my disciples. Well, it turns out that they didn't plan for the wine to last the whole week. They ran out at some point, maybe a couple days later, and that was a horrible social faux pas. in the first century. And so let's see how Jesus handles it. With the wedding guests with him, the groom of this wedding, it's unknown whose wedding this was, but the groom had picked up his bride earlier at her father's house in Cana. So everybody pay attention. Everybody look at me. Ready? Here's what's happening in this wedding. I want to, because when we think of wedding, we think of long white gowns, and in a church somewhere, you get together for a couple hours and the wedding ceremony's over and everybody goes home and the bride and groom go privately to a hotel and do what they're going to do, right? And then they go off to a honeymoon. But here's what happens in the first century, and you might have to let the little kids go play in their room for a second, because we're going to talk about actually what's happening here culturally in this wedding, because it's super different than what we would assume a wedding is. The groom had gone to his bride's father's house to pick her up. So at night, it's usually at night, the friend of the bridegroom and a whole procession with the bridegroom goes and starts yelling, running through the city. Imagine like 7, 8 at night or whatever, everybody's getting ready for dinner. And all of a sudden, the bride has been getting ready for this moment. So she's been preparing herself to get picked up by her groom, by the bridegroom. And so there's a whole procession that goes to the father of the bride's house. And they show up to this house, and the groom picks up the bride, literally picks up the bride, and takes her in a procession, a big party, all the way back to his house or his father's house. So the bride gets picked up, gets taken all the way back through the city, because they probably lived in the same city, or at least that's where they're having the party, and they go back to the groom's father's house. Well, watch what happens at the groom's father's house. In a procession from the bride's father's house, everyone followed the groom back to his father's house, where he had made a bridal chamber. While everyone waited, the bride and the groom entered the bridal chamber, and intercourse sealed their marriage. So think about this. Ready? We look at our sex life in America as super private, and like, you go to a hotel on your first night or whatever, and you go to your honeymoon, and you're kind of secluded. Well, in the first century, it wasn't that way. Do you realize this? There wasn't really a static marriage ceremony in the first century. It was a bridal procession. Contracts had already been signed. So like with Joseph and Mary, they were in a time of betrothal before they had this ceremony or this moment right here of the whole big party. The documents, they're already legally married, but they just haven't slept together yet. So watch this. This is their sleep together moment, and it's not just them. Everybody came to their moment. So think about this. Now, this is going to wreck your brain as an American person. Ready? Because we're autonomous and we're just like, I don't like anybody up in my business. You want to talk about people up in your business? It would have been a first century Jewish wedding. A groom goes, picks up her bride, literally picks her up from her father's house, and in a bridal procession, they go back to his father's house. They go into a bridal room that the groom has prepared for them, the two of them. Watch this. The whole party is sitting and waiting for them. So they're like, well, you can't start the party until Bartholomew and Rebecca, whoever they are done. And so watch, they're all sitting there. This would have been Jesus. Jesus would have been sitting there going, when's this party getting going? And the friend of the bridegroom waits at the door to hear the voice of the groom to tell everybody it's the friend of the bridegroom's job to let everybody know, hey, the party can start. Because this marriage has been started. In the room, we started it. So that's what just happened. Watch, that's the beginning of the marriage now. The intercourse between a husband and wife has sealed their marriage. The documents have already been done. But this moment now is their moment of joy together that they've shared, not just their lives, but their bodies. They've literally become one before God. And now this party can start. In our culture, we party before husband and wives get together with intercourse. But in the first century, it was like, we have to wait for them. because they're truly kind of not married until this oneness happens. But once that happens, now the party's on. Now the whole party can start. And that's what you're seeing here. It's been about a day or two since that happened, and now they've run out of wine. And this is horrible if you are the two families that have made this party happen. Here's one of the principles. Ready? God's design of marital sex should always be celebrated. And you know what's sad is that sometimes in our culture, we celebrate immorality, or we celebrate, our kids sleeping around, or we celebrate, even infidelity or adultery. We kind of turn the other way in our culture. And Scripture has no room for that. Scripture says inside of marriage is the most beautiful moment of that two people can have, as close as they literally can be. And not only the physical union is a beautiful picture of marital unity, but it's a spiritual union as well. So intercourse is not just physical, it's also spiritual. And so Scripture says to celebrate that, like this is the moment of not just two people physically enjoying each other, but this is the spiritual moment of like, this is the oneness that these two people have waited for. And so that's to be celebrated and party. And that's exactly the picture, the first century Jewish picture of marital sexual intercourse was like, this is a moment of beauty that all the friends and family should celebrate. And it's because now two families are together and literally two people are together. Being that Mary, Jesus' mother, was concerned with the festivities and that Jesus and his brothers had been invited to this wedding, the person getting married was likely Jesus' relative or Nathanael's. So Nathanael, one of Jesus' disciples, was from Cana of Galilee. So one of Jesus' disciples, that's his hometown. This isn't Jesus' hometown, but it's very possible that because Mary looks like she was involved in the festivities and Jesus and his brothers were invited to this party, it looks like it could have been one of Jesus' relatives that was getting married there, which is why the whole family was invited to this wedding. Or it could have been Nathanael, one of Nathanael's relatives, because he was one of Jesus' disciples, and they might have all been invited because Nathanael was now a follower of Jesus. And here's the principle, ready? As the oldest son, even Jesus had family obligations. So now think about it. Think we're in quarantine right now. I hope in your family, everybody's got a job to do. So the littlest one gets to pick up toys, and your teenage son, after he wakes up at the crack of noon, takes the trash out or whatever. Like, hopefully there's a family working together, if you have a family at home, working together to get things done around the home, because everybody gets to enjoy the house. And so everybody should share some responsibility in taking care of the home. Now, in the first century, we see that Jesus now, he's starting his ministry. You would think, Jesus, you got better things to do. You only have 3 years to do ministry before you're going to die. So think about it. If you only had 3 years to live, what things would be important to you? Probably not going to a wedding. Going to a family business would be like out the door, like you guys got to take care of that stuff. I got other things to do. But you know what I love about this story is that Jesus shows up to a wedding. Could have been his relative, could have been Nathanael's, a friend of his or whatever. He shows up. And literally, he's going to start his ministry, and he only has a short amount of time to get it all done. But he shows up to this wedding and blesses it. And I think that's so beautiful from Jesus, that he has family responsibility. He doesn't bail on his family. He doesn't bail on mom. It's very possible at this time, you want to talk about family drama, it's very possible because Joseph doesn't show up after Jesus is 12. It's really possible that Joseph died and that Jesus became the head of his home. And so Jesus was now kind of one of the breadwinners of taking care of his mother Mary and the younger brothers and sisters. So think about it. Like, Jesus is not just taking care of business, but he's actually going to things that are family obligations. And whether we love family obligations or we hate it, understand that being a family is a privilege from God. And the things that a family does together, you should always try to participate in. Even Jesus does it here, and he's got a lot of other stuff going on other than just wanting to show up to a wedding. Whether he wanted to be there or not, he went there to show support for his family or his friends or his relatives, or at least his mom, who it seems like Mary was involved in the wedding ceremony. By Jesus taking time to attend and participate in the festivities, it showed his approval and blessing of marriage. I'm going to bend your mind, all you legalistic people. This is going to hurt your brain. So when I was growing up, I grew up in kind of a legalistic type of background, and so it would have been like the worst thing in the world to think that Jesus actually drank some wine. Wine was like a 4-letter word. Well, it actually is a 4-letter word, but they would use it as like, it's almost profanity to think that Jesus drank real wine with alcohol in it. And the answers have always been, well, it wasn't real wine, or it was boxed with water or whatever. No, that's nowhere even in the Bible. That's just made up by people who don't want Jesus to have done some of these things. And so for those of us that grew up in alcoholic homes where we grew up with violent parents or brothers and sisters who drank a lot and they were alcoholics, and we remember those times as associated with alcohol. We don't want, to think that Jesus went down that road too. Well, here's the good news, is that in a wedding, Jesus drank real wine. Jesus creates real wine, and I'm going to even wreck your brain more. It's very possible that Jesus even danced. Say it's not true. The Jesus I know didn't do those things. Well, guess what? In the first century Jewish culture, they danced a lot. Now, it wasn't like the dancing of like Miley Cyrus dancing at, a club in Vegas, but it was like real dancing of like just celebratory dancing, okay? So here's why I'm telling this to you. I want to fix your mind from poor teaching. I want to teach you what actually happened in Jesus' day. And one of it was Jesus drank real wine. Jesus did the cultural things of his day. It wasn't wrong. He supported it because it wasn't sinful. It wasn't against the law of God. And so understand, Jesus was there like a regular person, enjoying a wedding, having a glass of wine, maybe dancing with some of the friends and family that were gathered there. And just like the wedding in the Garden of Eden that Jesus was a part of because he was God at the beginning of creation, he supports this wedding in Cana the same way he supported the wedding in the Garden of Eden at the very beginning with Adam and Eve, our first two parents. God created Eve and created this beautiful union of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that first wedding, overseen by God, same as the wedding in Cana with different cultural traditions, but overseen by Jesus. And they're the same. That Jesus was there in the garden with Adam, and he's there in this wedding of his relatives as well in Cana. So here's a principle. God designed life to have moments of celebration and rejoicing. And I love that. I want to give you a true biblical picture of Jesus. That, here we have a picture of Jesus who's not the guy that goes, I'm not going to go there because there might be fun. I don't want to do the F word, which is have fun. Let's not do that because I'm Jesus and I just have to sit in a dark room and, think about how holy I am. No, Jesus is a real guy that does real things, that has real family obligations. He goes to real parties. He goes to real celebrations, and he never sins nor promotes sin in anybody else's life. But fun isn't sin. Sin sometimes is fun, and those are the kinds of fun you shouldn't do. But understand that celebrating is part of God's design for humanity. I mean, throughout the Old Testament, God literally put it in the law to have major feasts. Like, he put it in the law, like, you are required to party. Woo, that's my kind of Jesus. Let's go. And so watch, in the Old Testament, God has a bunch of rules that says don't do all these things. But then there's other rules that's like, do these things. And many of those rules were, have a feast to me, get together, eat, drink, enjoy each other's company, enjoy your family, enjoy everybody that's around you. I mean, like, that's the heart of God. The heart of God, some of us have just grown up in really poor teaching or bad churches or bad whatever that's just taught us poorly about the character of God. God is never pro-sin. God's never pro-drunkenness. God's never pro-addiction. But he's also not anti-fun. He's not anti-celebration. He's not I have to separate myself because I'm so godly. Now, Jesus here supports a wedding. He supports the festivities. He supports the celebration of godliness, which is a beautiful wedding in a beautiful setting with beautiful people doing the things that their culture did back in that day. Number one, the wedding. Number one, the wedding. Number two, the water. So now let's get to the miracle. Now that I laid that whole foundation, let's get to the miracle. And there's a problem here. They ran out of wine, which is a horrible thing for a first century wedding. As there were possibly more people than the groom had planned for, like Jesus' disciples came with him, they ran out of wine, which was an insult to the guests and an embarrassment to the two families. Asking for a solution or possibly a miracle, Mary tells Jesus about the problem. Surprisingly, he relationally distances himself from her, calling her woman. While respectful, he would not be manipulated by anyone, including his own mother. So listen to me, ready? It's a little weird in this first story that Mary kind of comes over to him. Have you ever had your mom try to tell you what to do when you're an adult man? Don't say anything if you're living at home right now, okay? Or if you're a husband, you ever had your wife come over and tell you that something needs to get done? Don't say anything, because I don't want to wreck your marital bliss, okay? So for men, one of the worst things in life for a man, so let me give you some insight into a man's mind if you're a woman, okay? One of the worst things in a man's life is when his mother, if he's an adult living outside the home, his mother comes up and gives him something to do, like puts responsibility on him. Or maybe a wife comes and goes, something that kind of doesn't have anything to do with the home, but they're like, you wouldn't believe this traumatic thing. You need to go do something about it. So somebody else gives you responsibility. And that's what's happening here in John chapter 2. Mary's not just giving him some information like, hey, you know what? Looks like they ran out of some wine. Isn't that weird? Mary's coming over kind of going like this to him. And he's an adult man. He's the head of the home right now because Joseph's probably dead. And so Mary goes over to Jesus and like, hey, Jesus, they ran out of wine. And this isn't a mom going, here's some information. This is a mom saying, I want you to fix this problem. So Mary's taking all the responsibility that doesn't even belong to Jesus. Jesus just showed up going, I just came here to dance. But he gives all the responsibility to Jesus and goes, there's some bad things that are happening here with these families. I need you to fix it. That's why Jesus goes, woman, what does this have to do with me? And in the Aramaic, or, when Jesus is speaking there, it's not an insult, but it's saying, time out. You're not going to manipulate me. You're not going to give me problems that belongs to somebody else just because you're my mother. You're not going to walk into my life and go, you have to do this stuff because it bothers me. And I like that about Jesus. Jesus wasn't a slouchy pushover even from his own mom. But you know what he does? He has mercy on the situation. He goes, I'm not going to be manipulated, but I love people. So let's see how Jesus handles this. Possibly to show concern for his relatives, but primarily to foster faith in his own disciples, he had 6 25-gallon jars filled with water. And here's the idea. All the buckets of well water that they dumped in those 6 25-gallon jars left no doubt what was actually in there. Because sometimes I wonder, why didn't Jesus just leave them empty? Well, because then somebody could have said, oh, those were almost already full of wine. Or there was already some stuff in there. Well, having guys go get buckets of water and fill these massive stone jars all the way to the brim, like literally no one could say that's some kind of trick. So watch. Here is a picture of Cana, and it looks down over the valley. And so this is a picture from Cana. So you can actually go there. Maybe we will go there when we go to Israel. Cana was built up on a hill. You see a fertile plain down below it. And there's a stream that runs right in between this hill and the land, the farmland down below. So I want you to look all the way across this picture. Look way to the back on the other side of that little hill right there. You see kind of the white dots on that far hill. That's actually Nazareth. And Nazareth was separated from Cana by about 9 to 10 miles. And so they were close to one another. Literally, you could see the two cities from each other. And Jesus now is very close to where this picture was taken, up on this hill. This is Cana in Galilee. And here's the ruins of it. This is the picture of a house or a synagogue that they've just unearthed. And you can see here, this would have been a place where, 10, 20, 50 people, 100 people are gathered, packed in and outside of this building structure where they would have had this wedding. Well, the Jews had, in this particular city, because it had a synagogue in it, they had 6 huge stone water jars. And they would draw water out of a well, and they would put them in jars just like these. So these are actually jars that they have found in Galilee that are in a museum in Israel today. And look how huge these jars are. They hold about 25 to 30 gallons apiece. And the servants are told by Jesus, go to the well, get some water. And imagine, it probably took them, a half an hour, 45 minutes to fill these, depending on how far they had to go to get water, to fill these jars. And imagine everybody watching them fill these jars with water. And they're kind of going, what are these guys doing? We need wine, not water. Ready? Number 1, the wedding. Number 2, the water. Jesus is going to do a miracle here to help his relatives out or his friends out, but primarily to foster faith inside of his disciples. Like he wants his disciples to believe in him. So he's going to do a miracle here to do both things. Help the party at the wedding and also to make his disciples go, you are the man. And that's what he's doing right here. He's not doing it because his mom asked him to do it. He's doing it because he's going to get both things done, which is help his disciples have faith in him as the Messiah, a miracle-working God in the flesh, and also help his relatives out, which leads us to number 3, the wine. Number 1, the wedding. Number 2, the water. Where'd they get the water from? Probably a well right there in Cana or the stream down at the bottom of the hill, but they filled up these jars, and there was no doubt that they were packed full of water. And number 3 is the wine. Knowing there was no chance to go buy enough wine for everyone, Jesus creates 150 gallons of the best wine. So I want you to understand something. We live in a winemaking area. We have wineries just outside of Temecula here where we live in Southern California. And a bottle of wine can range anywhere if it's not very good. So some of you guys buy Strawberry Hill, which is like 38 cents or whatever, and shame on you, one, for buying bad wine. But the reality is you could buy wine that's really garbage for, $1, or you can buy, really good wine, $20, $30, $50, maybe $100 if it's super rare. So watch, there's a range of wine. Some of it's garbage, and some of it is like, if you know a wine, you taste it and you go, this is fantastic. It's unbelievable. So watch, Jesus here, I love this. He creates wine. He makes water into wine, fills all of these ritual purification jars with not just like some Strawberry Hill garbage from the 1st century, but he puts some like high-end Cabernet in the top of all the way to the top of these jars. And it's so much so that he sends one of the guys to go scoop out some of that water and go give it to the master of the feast. Because this is obviously a pretty wealthy family. If they had a guy who was running the whole wedding, it's very similar to what we would have. Brides often hire usually a woman to kind of run the festivities for the day. They'd hire somebody to make sure everything happened. Well, that was the master of the feast. And so now this servant goes and gives him a glass of it. And imagine the servant going, I don't know why I'm giving this guy water. But the master of the feast, who was probably the guy that was responsible for getting enough wine for everybody, that's his job, and they all ran out, and he's going, I am going to get my butt chewed for this. And all of a sudden, he gives him the wine, and the master of the feast goes, wow, usually by this time, a day or two into the wedding, everybody's just drinking the garbage wine because you give everybody the best wine when their palates are fresh. And he goes, you didn't save the best wine for last. Like, this is the best wine we've had at this wedding. Like, this is the best stuff I've ever tasted. Why would you save it for now? And now all of the servants and the disciples are going, no way. Like, he just did a miracle right in front of our face, undeniable. And Scripture says they believed in him. And this is that moment where the disciples go, whoa, we're not just following some random teacher that's talking about, good philosophy or theology. We're following a guy that can do literal miracles, and we've never seen this before in human history like this. As God, he didn't have to wait for grapes to ferment, but made it instantly. So here's something interesting. So so the master of the feast, when he got that, he immediately said, this is the best wine we've had. So not only is he talking about how good the wine is, but he's actually saying, this is well-fermented wine. So watch, Jesus turns water. Water doesn't help you get wine. Water is just always water. But if you have grapes, it can become fermented and into wine. Well, watch, Jesus instantly creates wine out of water, and it's perfectly fermented. So if it takes you 30 days or 60 days or 90 days to ferment wine, Jesus takes out all the time frames and makes wine. And here's one thing I want to say. Jesus has the ability to create everything mature. He has the ability to create everything up and running. The master of the feast would have tasted that wine and went, wow, it took you 3 months to make this wine. Where did you dig this out of? But Jesus creates everything so that it can be used immediately, like he did at the first 6 days of creation. He creates everything up and running. And so everything doesn't have to take millions or billions of years or 60 days to make wine or whatever. Jesus creates it so that it can be used immediately. And if you were to have tasted that wine, you'd go, wow, this has been around for a long time, but it was literally made 30 seconds ago. Ready? It was so good that the master of the feast wondered why he saved the best for last. So look at this. Imagine you come to my party, right? And I'm your pastor. And you go, I wonder if we should bring some wine. The answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. Just make sure you bring good wine. Don't bring Strawberry Hill or something else. Something that you can buy like 5 for $3. Just take that and dump it in the toilet and throw it away. But hey, you come to a party, you come to my son's wedding or whatever someday, and it's appropriate to bring wine. Why? Because there's nothing sinful about wine. There's nothing sinful, and same thing with sexuality. Nothing sinful about intercourse. There's nothing sinful about drinking unless you're either an addict, you can't stop, or you become addicted and you become drunk. Same thing with sexual things. Inside of marriage, beautiful. Outside of marriage, absolutely prohibited and sinful. So the issue isn't what it is. The issue is how humans use it. Ooh, that was good too. Did you write that down? I hope you're not sleeping. Man, here we go. Ready? And here's the principle. While not approving of inebriation or addiction, God loves a good party. Wow. Hey, wow. Write that down. Write that down. So watch right here, because this is a stumbling block, literally, for a lot of people that are like, I don't want to know that Jesus actually drank wine because then people are going to be tempted to drink wine or whatever. Here, it's really simple. The principle is this. The principle is everything can be used as a good gift of God if it's used correctly. It's like money. Money, there's nothing wrong with money. Is neutral. It can be used for sin. It can be used for God. You can give it to the church. You can give it to, help somebody out in their time of need or whatever. Money isn't good or bad. Wine isn't good or bad. Sex isn't good or bad. It's just what you do with it that makes it either sinful or glorifying to God. Everybody with me? Everybody understand what I'm saying? How about you people? Excellent. So understand what I'm saying. That we don't have to put a bubble around Jesus to make sure that he doesn't do things that we think are wrong. We let Jesus do what he's going to do, and we just have to understand what's correct about biblical teaching. The Bible never approves of drunkenness. The Bible never approves of inebriation. The Bible never approves of you losing your ability to keep control of your mouth or your bodily actions. And so if you're either addicted or you shouldn't ever drink, if alcohol is a weakness for you, don't ever drink. But if you're able to not be addicted and not get drunk, wine or whatever is totally appropriate. And that's what Scripture teaches about that. Instead of making a public production out of his power at a small town in Galilee, Jesus begins to reveal his divinity. And I love this, and I end with this. Here's our principle. God often uses the small moments of life to make the biggest impact. Wow, isn't that beautiful? Like God often doesn't, because here's what we would think. If it was me or you, that had this kind of power, you know what we'd do? We would have done like a Instagram video of it. And we would have put it out for the whole world to see. And you go, guess what? I'm amazing. Does anybody know how amazing I am? And people in the comment section are like, you're not that amazing. Well, check this video out. I just made some wine, son, out of some water. Anybody want to take me on? Who's going to do that? And everybody at the party would have been like, dude, this is legit. Like, this is legit. So we would have thought Jesus would have made a big production out of how amazing he is. You know what his first miracle is, proving he's God in the flesh? Is in a little wedding in a small town with just his boys around him and just a couple people to know he's God. Like in those small little moments, God begins to do something massive. And I want to encourage you with that as we close, that God can do amazing things with you. All God needs is just the smallest desire to be used by him. God doesn't need you to be some magnificent, fantastic cultural juggernaut. You know what God needs of you? God needs the willingness to do what he asks you to do. When he asks you to do it, you step into that role. And if you're faithful in small things, God gives you more and more and more and more and more. Nothing wrong with being popular. Nothing wrong with having an amazing influence in the world. But the point is, nobody just gets that out of nowhere. Like God sees faithfulness in the small seeds of your life, and he starts to grow those things, and he grows your influence from there. That's the same thing that Jesus did here. He doesn't start out wandering around in Rome going, look at these parlor tricks I can do. He starts in his own town. He starts in his own area and starts these small little things because he knows inside the hearts of his disciples, this is the beginning of something great. And that's my encouragement to you, is God wants to do something great in your life. And it often starts with just the small things. When we are faithful in small things, God grows our faith and God blesses our obedience. And that's how we live a blessed life, is the God who wants to bless us, blesses obedience. When we step in and do the small things that God uses to become great things for his kingdom and his glory. God bless you this week. I love you. And I will see you next Sunday.